Well, once again, thanks to everyone who's joined us today. We've got a number of people that have come back from last week and also some new attendees. Welcome to our second part of Leadership by Design, and that's called Sticky Teams. And I'm joined again by my good friend and also professional colleague, Rohan Dredge. Hi, Rohan. Welcome.
Hey, Sam. How you going? Hey, everybody. Welcome back to those of you that are back from last week, and welcome to people who are here for the first time. It's great to be here, Sam.
Excellent. Look, we had a great session last week. I personally enjoyed it, got a lot out of it myself, and really looking forward to digging in a bit deeper this week. And I guess this is a phrase that you've got, sticky teams, Ro. Maybe you could sort of phrase what that is. It's a strange term, but maybe you need to elaborate on it. It's not about some people that are maybe sitting in a sauna or something.
Yeah, like it's not sort of tropical fruit related or hygiene related or anything like that. It's actually it's a really great metaphor for how you would like to see and experience the functioning of a group of people. I don't know what your world has looked like outside of work for the last 12 months or so, but I certainly have probably increased my Netflix intake. And so some of the documentaries that have come out where they're talking about the coaching, and there was a documentary with Doc Rivers where he was talking about your job is to coach the team. And then he began to sort of frame up his belief around what a team is and how it works and how it functions. And essentially, Sam, it comes down to this point where we're talking about a team that really decides to be mature and actually play well together on the thing that we've committed to doing. And so Sticky Teams is all about what it is. This conversation, it's all about a case study that we'll talk through with Sam, and it's all about how you might actually get there. Because when we touched on this last week where we talked about, you won't get a sticky team by accident. You'll get a sticky team by design or by intention. Sam.
Excellent. Thanks, Rohan. That's a very apt description, and it's really important that we clarified that point so people understand the context going from there. So let's continue. We've got a few quotes here. You can only get bigger by growing broader.
Yeah, I use this when I begin to talk about leadership development and embedding culture into organizations and teams. And so we pick up this idea, and just as we launch into this, Sam, I will say I've got the chat box and the Q&A box open on my left. And so when Sam's talking, I'll be able to look at that and access that. If there's something you want to make comment on or add some value to the conversation, jump in. If there's a question that comes up, I encourage you just to write it straight away as it comes up. And at the end, we'll spend some time doing Q&A as well. This idea here is actually about making the mindset shift from being somebody who's in a team to being someone who leads a team, Sam. And so it's recognizing that if we go out in my home office here, we go, if I grow leaders this way, they can actually carry capacity that way. And so when we're talking about building not just people who can do their jobs really well, we're actually talking about building people who can lead effectively. They carry the culture, they understand our values, they commit to the common language, they have a courageous tenacity about who we are and where we're going and what it looks like to be part of DPN or part of 4 Leaders Global or part of the organization that you're in one sense, but it's also an invitation to say, hey, your job, and this is that segue we make from last week's self-leadership to this week team leadership, your job is actually not to raise up more people that can get the job done. It's actually to raise up more people with a leadership mindset that will deepen the bench of your organization and team.
It's excellent, Rohan. Can't agree more. So, building a bench we know that metaphor in sports. It's always important to have
And
a new generation of leaders coming.
And we jumped in on this one for you, and you go, excellence is for wimps. We need to aspire for perfection. A good Sam Khalil quote to launch us off. So, but then, and I know we'll pick this up in our conversation, but why this one? Why is this one the one you picked to put in here?
Yeah, look, so, in many, I guess, aspirational phrases, people aspire for excellence. And it sounds great. And it's true. I mean, we do want to do things with excellence. However, what happens when, the word excel just means to go past. And if you enter into, say, an industry or a sphere of influence that you're working in, and everything's actually quite average, excelling could mean just going a little bit further past average. So you could say we're in excellence, we've excelled. However, sometimes you've got to look at some things and say, we need to set a benchmark and pursue perfection. And it's a higher calling in that regard, because it is a relentless desire to accept what the status is and just wanting to aspire or go past or excel past it. You need to aim for a lot higher. And doing that then sets a benchmark. And then people can try to excel past that. That's great. But you need to really have a high ambition.
I actually reflected on that as it was quite challenging, because I'm not sure I reframed this idea of perfection into the world that we're living in, particularly the last little bit, and then working with clients as they reset who they are and where they're going. But I found that inspiring and equal parts challenging. So you kind of set the bar a bit higher, which I think is part of the way you lead, which is great.
Excellent. All right, so let's begin to unpack some of this, Rohan.
Yeah, so this whole idea of sticky teams. So philosophically, let's start with that. Philosophically, the shift from last week to this week is, last week was all about self-leadership, and we introduced the idea of voices. We'll pick that up again today, mostly because that's one of the most elegant products that I bring to market in the work that I do, and help people understand what it's like to be on the other side of them. So here's a question for you right at the outset. What's it like to be on the other side of you? We picked up this idea of you, the leader, last week, and we're segueing across into a more broad perspective today, which is, okay, what about in the context of team? What about in the context of the people that you work with? Because that's where it's most experienced. That's where your leadership style most comes to the fore. And we help leaders understand that and then lean into it. And so if last week was about you and your personal self-leadership, today is about how that outworks in the context of the people that you work with. And a sticky team, we've defined a sticky team like this. Sam and I sat down and we're in our preparation, and there's a lot of work that's out there and done around teamwork. And I think one of the things that we're wanting to do with and for you today is just to smarten some things down so that you can actually go away and make some changes. So we talk about this idea of a sticky team being characterized by three things. Number one, a clear identity. Why you exist. You've actually got a sense of, this is who we are as a team. And it's what I find so fascinating about sporting teams. They can play the same code, but in a different way, because they understand their identity. So the big idea is the same. I live here in Melbourne. It's very AFL, but then in other parts of our country, it could be rugby league or union AFL, football or soccer, however you want to describe it. So a clear identity is really important. And then a compelling culture, I think, becomes equally important. You imagine these are three parts of a circle all joined together. And then what we called was engaged execution. So identity, culture, and execution, we think, are the foundational building blocks for a sticky team, for a foundational building block for a team that's going to be able to lean into their responsibilities and do justice to what we've all put our hand up to do. Now, you'll notice already, if you were here last week, Sam and I have got a bias to action and execution and performance. We've both got Sam's nodding and kind of smiling to himself there. And so you'll hear us kind of run downhill towards, okay, let's go, let's do something. Now, I'm assuming that you're on this conversation as well, so that could be part of what matters to you too. So Sam, we designed this together of all of our kind of learning and study and research on teams. What's your commentary on that before we lean into DPN as a case study?
Look, can't agree more. Knowing why you exist, how you're going to, what context you do your work and how you go about it, and then always going into action execution, because you can't be philosophical. And, I think we said this last week, vision without execution is fantasy. So there always must be application. There must be accountability. Otherwise, what benefit are you to society and to those around you? So it is important to know who you are, and then out of that being, there is a doing. If you just rush off to the doing and you don't establish that identity, it really affects the doing. And we all will encounter challenges and tough days and what have you. And if you don't know your why, that's when you're most likely to give up. And knowing the why and having the culture and having that tsunami of support from a group of people will allow you to keep doing and doing more and doing it in the right way. So it's for the sustainability, the longevity, and for the impact to have all these components working.
Yeah, and they don't happen by themselves. Again, we want to stress that most of the time when we talk with clients and people, I ask them questions, and one of the questions is, so tell us about the clarity of your vision. And it's not clear at all. Or okay, tell me about your strategy for leadership development. And there isn't one. And so I'm saying that just because in conversation, what we've got to remember as leaders is these things happen because we design them to happen, or we're intentional versus accidental. What I wanted to be able to do, and Sam and I are going to play a little bit of sort of flipping the coin together on this conversation. And I actually listened to the case study of DPN as Sam and I were designing this webinar for you. And I thought it was an excellent example of how to understand identity, culture, and execution. So Sam, jump into that next slide and just talk to us about DPN. Now, we know that, we're not sitting here sort of selling a DPN set of steak knives at the end of this webinar. So we can really champion the work that you did in developing an organization way back to those things that you wrote in 2009 or 10. So you've done this, you've been intentional about it, you've worked hard, you've included people. Take us through these layers and what you did and how DPN experienced it, both at a strategic and a tactical level. What worked, what didn't, what did you learn?
Thanks, Rohan. And look, this is what I love doing. It's, certainly love helping people. And, this is our story. So today, as I said, and last week, we're not trying to sell anything here. It's not a usual product or service proposition. This is really just to add value to those in our spheres of influence, whether it be partners or clients and the realms of leadership they operate in. So it's just telling our story. And I guess if we look at these 4 points here, I'll help unpack our story because I thoroughly enjoy what I do. It's I feel it's my calling, and I get a real kick out of it, and I enjoy it, and the people I'm with really enjoy what we're doing. So if we look at what I would call a core ideology, which helps develop that identity, it's made up of 2 components, your core purpose and your core values. So let me unpack what those are. So for DPN, our core purpose is live the life you want. And this was resulted out of a number of workshops, and it was actually my executive assistant and marketing assistant a number of years ago. And this is important. It would be good for you at some point to unpack, where you see that all of these don't just come from one person or just maybe the directors or the owners of a corporation. It's allowing that expression to come out. But when people look at us, they might think of us as a property or a financial services company, but we don't believe that's what we are. We believe we're a lifestyle company. Our core purpose, the reason we're on this planet, is to empower people to live the life they want. whether that's providing them with a home loan or building an investment portfolio, or our staff working in our company, or building specialist disability accommodation. And I'm going to unpack that a little bit in a moment. But the whole idea, we look at it, we're saying, are we helping people? Are we empowering people to live the life they want? That is our why. So everything we do, everything we design, every product and service is about enhancing and empowering and improving people's quality of life. So we see ourselves as a lifestyle company in that regard. Then we have core values. And, as I studied, large organizations and those that wanted to grow, and again, these are your basic building blocks of culture. And if you look behind Microsoft, Apple, anything, they are all intentional about building culture. Any civilization in this world that's lasted and continued to have influence has a strong culture, and there are values that are agreed in that organization. There's a purpose. And so for us, we've got 4 values that we defined. They came out of us. They were non-negotiable. These are not things you just, copy and piggyback off someone else. They are you. They're not necessarily a right and wrong, but they have to be the things that resonate with you and that you want. And, we've got them up on our walls, but they need to be in our hearts and our minds. And, all of our leaders need to know them by heart. They need to perpetually teaching them and training them. So these are what create our framework. And it's just like, you might be an Australian. No Australian's born and given a handbook that says, this is how you're to be an Australian. This is how you behave and what have you. But there are cultural values that we have in Australia. And we have a society that, believes in a fair go, where we're not so, there's not so much a class structure as some other nations and people groups. And what makes Australia, Australia, and that's what people want to come into this culture, because they like our freedom, our liberties, and our way of life. So for us, the 4 values that DPN is built on is, one is wealth for all. And that's really important. So we sat down and said, are we going to be a group of owners that only extract the most value by exploiting our workers, exploiting our partners, and taking advantage of our customers? We said, no, that's not a value. Our customers need to win. We can't do things that take advantage of our customers. Our staff need to win. So there's got to be economics and opportunities for them to generate wealth. Our suppliers, well, we can't be, maybe some supermarkets have done that and pushed suppliers to the brink, but also the charities we support. So that's a value for us. The second thing is experience wonder. And something that I really believe in is mystery is indispensable to wonder. So it means that whatever we look at, whether it be a team event, we can't be predictable. We can't just have the same food every time, chicken sandwiches with mayonnaise, because everyone goes, oh, no, I know what we're going to eat. So the staff, when they prepare an event, there has to be a level of surprise. We've won awards up against fintech companies around our customer experience because we've got a curated design of gifts and lifestyle experiences, because we focus on creating wow moments, surprise and delight. Another one is, the third one is phenomenal presentation. So whether it be website, the way we dress, our packaging, everything, we set a high standard. And the reason we do that is not just purely out of aesthetics, but the word presentation, the core word in presentation is press. And there's that saying that's, you never get a second chance at a first impression, you're pressing. So the idea of presentation, whatever we do, needs to be so high, because it is a form of branding. You're leaving a mark, and you want to leave an indelible mark. And that means all of your customer communications. Now, we're not perfect, but by having that standard, we're always looking at how can we improve every form of communication that we have, whether it be, as I said, our dress, our office space, our email communication, whatever it is always sending out a message. And people, when they go buy something, they don't just buy the product, they buy the context that product is in. So that's really important. And the final one is, everyone's an innovator and a builder. And, and that's creating an entrepreneur structure instead of an employee structure. Employees just check in, check out. Entrepreneurs are thinking about it all the time. And, you have these internal values, and they will be externally validated if you live them out. And so we've won a number of Innovator of the Year awards in the industries we're in. And that's because it was an internal value, and that needs to be taken by each leader and continually nurtured and asked for. And it doesn't have to be something necessarily revolutionary, but it's those incremental improvements, a 1% improvement in how they deal with a process or a customer experience. It's great. Then from there, we shift to this idea of one thing. And again, it's really important as a team to do it, again, as a business and all business units you have, you're successful not by what you do, but what you don't do. And you need to be so, how can I say, scrupulous and focused to make sure you're only doing the things you should be doing, and not be distracted by too many opportunities. And then bring that down to a team level, individual level. And what we always ask our team is, what's the one thing you need to accomplish this quarter and this year? And make sure that is elevated, you're held accountable, and you're driving for that. And that focus is so fundamental. If you've got competing priorities, you don't necessarily always have the bandwidth, and you're not going to be able to execute as well. And I'll come to this last one about opportunity and leverage, and that is there's a competitor to Apple that said to a design consultancy called IDEO, we're going to give you a lot of money. We want you to design a product that is better than the iPhone. And the consultant IDEO said, that's not possible. You need to understand the iPhone is not a product. It's the manifestation of a culture. You have to replicate the whole culture and everything else around it. It's not just a cut and paste and let's produce this phone. And my staff for years would actually probably get sick of me and roll their eyes because I'd always talk about Apple as an exemplar because my values resonated with their values and the way they approach. I remember Steve Jobs, early in the piece about going into smartphones, and again, he didn't excel. He had to aspire for perfection because what was around was not awesome. And he just said, look, if we could actually just capture 1% of that market, which is 1 billion phones, 10 million phones a year, we'd be happy. Well, we know the rest is history. This was the most transformational moment for Apple. They entered into a sector they'd never been involved in. They've certainly done more than 10 million phones a year. They're 250 million phones, but they transformed that sector. So why do I say that is that we took our core values, our DNA, and we were presented with an opportunity to get into specialist disability accommodation under the National Disability Insurance Scheme in Australia. We hadn't built a specialist disability home in our lives. Yet we came in and said, we're going to aspire for perfection. We're going to make a home that doesn't look like a disabled care home. And it's a home that people would say, this is better than my home. I want to live here. We were going to set the standard and do that. And so we took that idea of innovation, a phenomenal presentation, experiencing wonder. And we launched that pilot home in February this year. Prime Minister Scott Morrison opened it. And we'd actually even started off working with Apple in that, we're introduced to them through my nephew, and they were very cautious at first and said, you can never say you're partnering with us. By the end of that, as they came and saw it, they brought 3 busloads of people from their headquarters in Australia to have a look at it. We've subsequently had $230 million in orders, and we've revolutionized the industry. Why? That opportunity leverage took what we have, our DNA, infused it into a new opportunity, and the results are there. And what I say there is that our destiny or our values will cause us to collide with other people of similar values. And that's how we did encounter Apple. And, the team then were proud of me at one stage because now we're there pitching to Apple, presenting to them, showing them, and Apple's impressed with us and saying, how can we partner again in the future? So that, as we imputed our values to CASA, I'm going to wrap up here, Rohan, and it's now created even more opportunities, and we've gone into institutional realms, and now we're looking at growing all of our businesses, our property investment business, our finance business, our property management business. And as we've put our DNA and our values into a new sector, it has now given us greater credibility. And each one of our leaders running those different business units now has this strong conviction and belief. And when you've got even a small group of people that are united and have a strong belief, that stickiness, they're a dangerous group of people. So look, I've explained that in our context, and it wasn't for us, it wasn't just a clear step-by-step process. We did have an intentionality about it, but it took us a bit of time to get there, Rohan. And that was workshops with varying different consultants and organizations and reading books that I was aware of and creating this framework. But, it always required a discussion and collaboration, and I wish I'd gotten there sooner in that journey. So you as a consultant, how would you...
Just before you throw to me,
sure.
I think I just want to point out to people that are having this conversation. I actually pressed Sam to tell the DPN story for this particular conversation because I believed it was an excellent example of doing the work to get identity, culture, and execution. So Sam, question before we sure. come across to me for some tactical work. What would you do differently, knowing what you know now about the end result? What would you do differently? Would you speed things up? Would you deepen things? Would you take more time, less time? Because I think what we don't want to miss here is your executive assistant and the person who was the head of marketing at the time was the person who came up with the core phrase that's the identity of DPN. It didn't come from top down. It came from a set of conversations that you had. So what would you do differently reflecting on it now?
Well, again, if I said that understanding that principle that some of the best ideas can come from anywhere in your organization, And also that, this took a while to define these key ingredients for the architecture and the foundation of our business. The things that I would have loved to have is a clearer roadmap to help define those key things a lot quicker. So we did this, and this was not just a clear step-by-step process. We had intuitively there, but it was done through a number of conversations with varying different consultants and organizations, and you sort of felt your way around and began to put those pieces in play. But also then what else could have we extracted from people along the way? And some of these things have been refined along the way. You could get there sooner if we understood some of the dynamics of allowing and extracting the value of the collaborative or the corporate mind, the collective mind. And so I think they're the two things I would have done differently, is to always want to get there faster, but could we get there deeper and get more gold if we engage more people?
Yeah, I love it.
And so it's to that point then, Rohan, I'd say is that, like, again, you're a person here that has that structure. You come in and you engage with people on how to do that. So how would you help people work through that in an efficient and best practice manner? Whether it be a leader or a leadership team, an organization, whether it's for profit or for social sector, whatever it may be, how would you lead them through this process so they can get to this definition and then action a lot sooner?
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate what you've shared there. And if you get a chance to either shout out, to Sam, either via email or through the chat, do that. If you've got a question, put it in the chat at this point in time, and we'll come back to it before we finish. It's true. I think what happens at this point in time is everybody nods their head and says, yep, absolutely, that's good. And a number of different things happen. It sort of sits on a continuum. You've got some leaders at one end and they're saying, yep, we're good. Everybody's got it down. We totally understand it. But when you really go and dig a little bit deeper, it's on the wall, but not in the hall. It's not in hearts and minds, as you said, Sam. There are other things that occur. You come over to the left and you say, yep, I realize it's important, this end of the continuum. I realize it's important, but we just don't have time for that right now. And neither of those end results are any good. And what I don't want to do is I don't want to suggest for a minute that this is easy. I don't want to suggest for a minute that it costs you nothing. To do this well has a price tag to it. It's got an investment that's required by you. And I'm not talking money. I'm talking time, humility, listening, attentiveness, noticing, clarifying, feeding back, courage to actually nail your colors to the mast and say, experience wonder, is one of the things that we're going to be as an organization. So how do you do it? Well, the tactical part of this conversation comes back to me, and there are some big ideas that we use. And just jump to the next slide, Sam. So when we talk about some of these big ideas, the first thing we talk about is engaging every leadership voice. Now, if you were here last week, you'd expect me to say that because we're rolling out, whether myself and my business partner, whether the first group of people to be rolling out this very, very new leadership and people assessment called the 5 Voices. And you'll get a chance to do that at the end of this webinar and get your results and talk to us about it if that's something that interests you. But what I've noticed is when you engage every leadership voice, you hear what you need to hear at the right time and in the right way. Pursue ultimate clarity. So you've got to do the work to get down to using the right amount of words that describe your identity, your culture, and then what it means to do the execution side of it. And the third is to have the courage of your convictions. When you stand for something, not everything fits in. And I think it's very important on the other side of it that leaders are well trained to be able to take people through a process that says, we're all about this, but we're not that anymore. And so I think, so the idea of the way the values was expressed in CASA at DPN is a beautiful experience. I think Apple, in terms of the unboxing, just to my left is my brand new M1 chip Mac, and it was a beautiful process. And I got my 10-year-old daughter involved, and then I taught her about the whole idea of unboxing, and she was just delighted. And she actually sat at this desk and she said, "No, Dad, it's your computer. You can unpack it." And I'm thinking, oh, yes, I'm so glad you said that. And it's really, really important to understand those things. So the first thing is this idea of what's the one after this, Sam? Next slide. Next slide. Yeah, the first thing is this every leadership voice. I'm going to say two things about this. You will get the link to get the assessment. Do it. It's the most human, dignifying, and easy to apply way of understanding human behavior that I've found in 30 years of leadership. What we do is we smarten down the MBTI study. And we say, instead of trying to remember 16 different ways of understanding, we remember 5. From the quietest voice through to the most forceful or the loudest: nurturers, creatives, guardians, connectors, pioneers. So champions of people and relationships, champions of innovation and organizational integrity. That's the creative. Champions of process, scale, systems. That's the guardian. Champions of networks and relationships, that's the connector. And then champions of strategy, results, and drive, that's the pioneer. We need all of those things. Now, the way we help people understand it is we say everybody speaks all 5 voices. You just speak them in an order. I am first voice pioneer, second voice connector, third voice creative. So I'm 2 of the loudest voices, and it's easy for me to drown out the other 3. Sam's very similar.
That's right.
Now, when we talk, you talked about this last week, that when you discovered that about yourself, you made some changes. Do you want to just touch on that around sort of the engagement and who speaks first?
Yeah, absolutely, Rohan. So, I'd always been mindful of how much I do talk. And so there are times where I have talked and, like you said, drowned out the conversation, and also not myself, but other people in the room. And, that as we began to identify the other stronger voices in the room. And so I became very cognizant of trying to get those nurturers or creatives or guardians to speak up first. And I can't say that every time it's always been in that sequence, but at least I've been very, very cognizant that need to draw out the nurturers, the creatives, and the guardians in a conversation, and silence not only myself, but those that are still stronger voices in the room, and make sure that those people are heard. Now, if you can get the sequence right, that's really important. But at least if you can elevate and make sure people are spoken, because there are people that will walk out of that room and will not be able to speak at all because of the louder voices. And if they dominate that conversation, you've got a problem.
Yeah. So we talk about this idea, thanks, Sam, of knowing and utilizing all the voices. And so once you've got your assessment, this will tell you what they are. And then in order to navigate it through the idea of sticky teams, just turn it on its side with nurturer at the bottom, creative, guardian, connector, pioneer. And the way we teach teams to listen and engage with each other is to let the nurturers speak first, creative second, guardians third, connectors fourth. And then I always teach, go back to nurturers, because sometimes they're a bit intimidated and they think they haven't got anything worthwhile to say, and say, is there anything that's come up that you get to share? And it's not speak now or forever hold your peace. Then you let the pioneers speak, who have all the good ideas and speak with the most force. This has been transformational for teams. Why? Look at the percentages of the voices. 43% nurturers, 9% creatives, 30% guardians. If we turn team engagement on its side and we listen to 43%, 9%, and 30% of a team, 82% of your team gets to speak before any of the loudest voices get involved. That itself, that in and of itself, is a game changer. It really is. And it's transforming teams all over APAC, as we're discovering right now. So that's the first thing we teach. This is tactical. That's what we teach. What does that mean? What's your voice order? What are the characteristics? How do you do rules of engagement? The second thing,
right, just before you go there, so just so people know this, that we're going to send out this link that allows each person to do this assessment and even their team. Is that right?
That's correct. Yep.
And at the end of that, there'll be a document or something sent to each person, so they will know the key leadership voice they are and what their secondary or tertiary voices are.
We had a couple of conversations with people during the week, and I'm getting back to them before the end of the week. What you'll be able to do is actually go to the Giant website and log in, and in your login, once you've done the assessment, in the login, you'll be able to click on what they call voice pair insights and a couple of other different tabs. And it tells you about the characteristics of your voice order. It tells you about where you're at your best. It tells you about what we call your weapons system, which I'll touch on before we finish. So that, and then I get told that you've done that, and then I will reach out to you, or you can reach out to me, and we can work out what's next. So
thanks, Ray. That's great.
Yeah. We'll talk about the 5-day leadership challenge, which launches Monday, which is exciting, just before we finish. So how do I do this? I've got some proprietary IP that I've summarized in these 4 lines. But as Sam discussed, we take teams through an experience to help understand who they are, what they're about, how they're going to behave, and how they're going to get things done. Now, you may be sitting there going, yep, good with that. I'm across it, we're comfortable. Then use this as a way to evaluate. If you don't, this is the experience we take people through. 4 stages. We design what our priorities and values are. And by design, we clarify what they are. Or we value excellence. We value integrity. We value wonder. We value innovation. And we use a process that has everybody involved. Every voice is heard. People get to talk about these things with each other and have opinions, but they also need to work quickly to come to an agreement. So it's a really interesting and exciting and high energy place to be. So I've done it with 48 people before, and we slowly went through the room and got them to a point where they were able to agree on 6 priorities for them as a team. 48 people in a government department. And so to me, I consider that to be an absolute miracle. Then we define what those behaviors or values are. Yes, that's right. And then we deploy them, and then we defend them. Now, I just raced through those things for this reason. The idea of clarifying what your values or behaviors or purpose is, and the idea of communicating, so deploying, is not rocket science. And I just want to acknowledge that. I actually think of the 4 stages here, 1 and 3 are pretty straightforward. You can do that with anybody, can help you, that knows what they're doing, can say, all right, what are we about? What's our purpose? What's our why? How do we define it? Let's get it designed up and put on the wall and see what the way forward might be. Okay, let's tell everybody about it in an email. Let's make an email signature. Let's get a badge or a sticker or a journal made and hand it out to everybody at the start of the year, and then realize nobody uses paper anymore, and all these other things that we go on with. Where I think this gets beautiful is in 2 and 4. And what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is, once we know what we're about, we know what our purpose is, we know what our culture is, we know what our behaviors are, I take people through a process where they define what those values or behaviors are. And what I say is, a definition, it needs to be a bumper sticker that gives you immediate feedback about whether or not you're doing it. So let's take, for example, excellence. We're going to be excellent. Well, that's good. Well, what does excellence mean? To who? When? About what? And how does the person, if you're in a large organization, 3 or 4 steps away from you, how does that person even know and can self-manage whether or not that's happening for them? So one of the ways I define excellence is doing the very best with what you've got. Because excellence can get relative sometimes and go, oh, we don't have the resources of Apple. We're just a 3-person organization with a shared office or a working from home experience. Well, what's excellence in that environment? A couple of years ago, I did this with a very young group. And I do some leadership training in high schools, and I love it. And they said that they wanted servant leadership to be one of their characteristics. And I really challenged them. I said, well, that's because you have to say it, and it fits with the values of your school, and everybody expects you to be just like that. I said, but what does it really mean? How will you know as prefects and leaders over the next 12 months that you've really done it? And I tell you, this 16-year-old girl, she just looks straight back at me and she goes, oh, that's easy. First in, last out. And you could have knocked me over with a feather. I said to her, you know what? That is world class right there. What you just came up with tells us exactly whether or not we're being servant leaders. So this idea of defining becomes really, really important. And Sam and I, we're going to talk you through this in 30 or 40 minutes, but this stuff can take quite some time. Typically, I break them into half days and days, let there be a bit of space between, and then come back. Now, deploy is all about communicating, messaging, consistency over time. Something that might be useful for you if you're leading a group of people at the moment is this. People need to hear things 7 or 8 times before they start getting it. And you and I as leaders will be sick of saying it before people even start getting it. What do I mean by defend? Well, again, in very tactical terms, I take teams through an experience where I say this. I say, okay, great. Everyone's done excellent work. Good job. Now, I want you to go back to your table groups or back to your small groups or back to the work that you're doing by yourself. And I want you to answer this question. If we were to ruin the whole thing, what would we do? And that's it. And I just let it sit there. And it drops like a brick into the middle of a conversation where everybody is going, oh, I think things are going along beautifully. I think everybody's having a wonderful time. And then I talk about what would happen if we really messed it up? And this is where teams get honest about their vulnerabilities. This is where teams get honest about what they don't know. And it's why people like me have work, because we lean into these organizations. And if they don't like me asking that question, I go home that afternoon and don't come back to the office the next day. And so we get to be that third safe place for people who need this done and done well. And so we go away and say, okay, come back and tell us, like, if we were to really mess this up, what would we have done? And they come back and they say, we'd be talking behind each other's back, or we'd be making excuses, or we'd be not prioritizing clients, or I'd fudge my sales numbers. We'd do any one of those things. And we put these vulnerabilities together, and then they co-create, they collaborate together how they're going to deal with the setbacks before they even occur. And I tell you what happens. You want to talk about a sticky team? Bang. The trust just gets deeper, just like that. Just because they had the opportunity to talk about what might get in the way of success. And so then we go back, we revisit it, usually quarterly for about a year, and we take clients through that. And I'll finish with this one thing. Your voice order has a shadow side, and we call it the weapon system. And so when it gets down to the whole idea of deploy and defend, your weapon system may come to the surface. And we teach teams and leaders and organizations how to see when their weapon system is coming to the surface, number one. And number two, what might trigger your weapons system. And we're finding that when people know, as a first voice pioneer, and the weapon system is a grenade launcher, when they're not happy about it, they're walking around with the safety catch off and they just pull the trigger, and there's this disproportionate explosion to the poor person in the third cubicle on the left on the second floor, and they're just not there anymore because the pioneer didn't like it. And when the pioneer knows that and realizes that they can come across really hard, they can actually back up and come into the team more effectively. And so that is something that you can do over the next week. I'm absolutely sure of it. What we want to be able to, and if you've got a question, jump into the question box and we can respond to that. And then I'll hand to Sam to finish. As a result of today, you're going to get the 5 Voices Leadership Assessment, number one. And number two, you'll get an invitation to our 5-day leadership challenge, which starts on Monday morning. Really exciting. And essentially, we take leaders and teams through a deep dive into understanding how the voices affects your leadership and your team. We call it transforming team communication, and you'll be invited to it. You register, you get the videos. So if you can't be at all of them, it's all good. But as a value add, it's free. And as a value add, it's something that we want to be able to invite you to participate in. Sam.
How about I just get off mute? Thanks, Ron. That was really excellent. And again, it's how can I really encourage anyone that's listening on here to understand that some of these things, they seem philosophical, and what's the return here? And there's an investment to be made. And all I can say is that DPN today, our organization, the return that we have got by investing the time, by getting that definition, knowing our core purpose, our core values, executing and doing the things that we need to do, learning to what we defend, how we continue to communicate, has given us the return that we've got, both financially and from fulfillment. And so some of these things don't come naturally to people. They don't intuitively can't work these out. And if you've got someone like Rohan who understands and is very incisive and surgical and able to challenge you and coach you to get to there, it is an investment of both time and money. However, the return is significant. You can, and you could be running an accounting business, you could be running a bakery, whatever it is, and you think, how could I actually apply these and why would they be relevant to me? And you might be just good at doing, but unless you create this framework, you won't have some of these things that can actually change the world. And one of the values that we have in our organization, as in leadership principles, is audacious humility. And it sounds like an oxymoron, but that means, A, we want to change the world. We have this appetite and desire to make an impact in life. But the second part of that is that humility, and it's really important. And I guess one of the great aspects of humility is, being able to listen, be able to humble enough to ask for help, whether that is internally amongst the people within your team or externally bringing people in to inject wisdom and challenge the way we've got to do things. So I'd encourage you here that there's going to be these 2 tools sent out. They cost you nothing, right, other than your time to start with. And they are just a sampling. So you can get a feel of what are some of these valuable tools and diagnostics. But then if you really want to make a change and make an investment, we sometimes are happy to invest in something tangible like a laptop. But what about if we do get the wisdom and the IP that creates transformational change in an organization? And if you do make that investment with someone like a Rohan who comes in, all I can say to you, our company is who we are, and the people that we attract is because of these values and not because we bought the latest MacBook Pro or some piece of machinery in our company or an office space. It is these intangibles that become very tangible. So I'll wrap up and leave it there. Any questions there, Ro, that you could see on the feed?
No questions. I think it's just an opportunity to say thank you. We appreciate your time. We don't take it for granted. And I think that there's just a lot of value to be had thinking through intentional leadership in 2021. And we wish you all the best.
Excellent. Thanks, Rohan. Thanks, everyone listening. We're going to send out a survey. Again, we just want to get feedback on, was the content of value? Was the presentation of a standard that you wanted, and anything else that you might want to see from us as an organization? Again, it's not us about selling something today. It's giving, and we hope there's been benefit for our listeners. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Rohan.
Thank you.
And look forward to providing some more webinars in the future. All the best for 2021, everyone. Cheers.